In many ways, StreamYard is easier, but it's less powerful than what I usually use, which is OBS. So welcome, everybody, to the Counter Clipping Show. I'd like to welcome a friend of mine. All right, let's turn that off. I'd like to welcome, since apparently it didn't turn itself off, I'd like to welcome everybody to the stream, and I'd like to welcome a special guest, a friend, and a participant in the Origins Wargaming block with the Armchair Dragoons, and specifically the master of the Kriegspiel, Jim Owczarski. Jim, how's it going tonight?
Doing great. Pleasure to be here.
Of course, Jim has his own channel, which you will find a link to in the video description. There is an actual channel of the week. I didn't want to shortchange a channel of the week. Today's channel of the week is Almost Solitaire, which is a channel also linked in the video description. We're going to talk a lot about Kriegspiel tonight, and not the Avalon Hill Kriegspiel. Well, we will rag on the Avalon Hill Kriegspiel, to be fair, but that's not the topic. And I also kind of want to open with Kriegspiel, but then talk about some of those kind of non-traditional wargaming experiences that I personally have had, mostly at Origins, like the Kriegspiels and like the command post exercises, and for that matter, like the national security decision-making game. If there's interest in that, people say so, because I could get that guy on too, who's, I'm sure you know Merle Jim as well. So I've got his phone number. I could actually, funny thing, I didn't know this, Merle lives like 10 blocks from here. So,
really?
and he's like the guy that runs, or at least is one of the people who runs the national security decision-making game. And so, that's runs at every big convention, and you've played it too, I assume, right?
Oh, yes, many times.
Okay. So I've only done it the once, right? And I've thought, it's such a big, it's kind of a big time commitment, because it used to be, it was an 8-hour event. Now they have shorter format events. I think I did a 4-hour event thinking about it. But I walked out saying, A, this is tons of fun, and I will do this again. And B, this is totally LARP for wargamers. And that's totally what it is. I mean, nobody dressed up, but that's like the only thing that separated it from, it was totally a LARP for wargamers. So it was pretty fantastic. So I'd like to welcome everybody who has chimed in on the chat so far. Grumpy Gamer, Lee Grant, MJS83271. I can't math this hour. Dale Brady, Kaiser Bill, Charles Latour, Krusty Captain, Greg Grant, SW Heth Will, Todd Walser, Beatcake, and Carl Crater, Pete 41, John Longshore, and I think that's all we got so far. So yes, we have already. Jim has a fine headwear at the ready, as he always does, just in case somebody were to mention that exact thing, because Jim is also the master of the fine historical hats. So it's all good. And I am clipping, by the way, I'm going to finish up Indian Ocean region here tonight. I don't have too much left. So we are going to talk about Origins plans. Actually, I actually don't know the answer to this. I assume that folks are going to Origins and that there will be wargaming content at Origins this year. Do you have plans already been laid for that?
It's a little tricky, because they parked, because of what they did. I completely understand why they did it. That's not a criticism. I mean, it was either that or nothing, really. Anyway, it was either that or nothing. And the problem is now you lose all the school teachers that maybe had a few weeks away. You lose, and for me, I won't be able to make it, because that's right in the middle of my budget season, which is high season. I know that the head dude, Brant, he is definitely trying to pull it together. He's definitely trying to put it together, but it's going to be a little tricky to get all the bodies. And I know we won't have, I don't know if you've noticed, the mortality rate from Gen Con is remarkable. Some of the biggest players usually won't be there. So it'll be interesting to see how it affects Origins.
Yeah, and I don't really know. I know that is a thing, and I don't really know the reason, other than the pandemic has complicated things for some publishers, many of whom, of course, have day jobs, because they're, gaming publishers. So John Longshore says he's having trouble hearing. I am hearing You okay? Jim, your volume might be just a hair low, but it's not super duper low. Not for me. But then again, I have my volume up fairly high. So, see, that's way louder.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, it sounds better to me. So I am louder than almost everybody. So for the record, and my microphone is less than 6 inches from my cavernous yep. So let us know if that does improve the situation. So I am not even sure what movie line Hethwell is talking about here, even though I have seen the film. So best Napoleonic movie, Jim.
Waterloo.
Okay, that's reasonable. I think certainly if you want best Napoleonic battle scenes, there's no contest.
Yeah, it's pure Napoleonic nerd fan service. It's a sequence of lines that they Bodarchuk had his actors say the lines we expected them to say. They said them dramatically. You have the incomparable Christopher Plummer, the ever erratic Rod Steiger. But I would honestly say, if you want to feel for what it was to be a Napoleonic soldier, it's the Duelists.
That makes sense. I could see that.
I mean, it really, now it's one type of soldier, the Hussar, how they lived, how they fought, how they reacted to one another. Yeah, and the fight choreography, I'm sort of a shirt-tail stage combat relation to the fight director and the Duelist, so I'm partial to it.
Okay.
But you can't go wrong with either one.
Okay. So The Duelist is, as I recall, one of Ridley Scott's first movies.
Correct.
Remembering that correctly. Yeah, with Keith Carradine and Harvey Keitel as Napoleon. Boy, you wouldn't cast probably either of them, but especially Harvey Keitel as the Napoleonic officer nowadays, I don't think.
No, but he's masterful. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, his character arc, that story arc, and especially the way it ends. No spoilers for those who haven't had a chance, but the way that story ends is it's just about perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's on a very short list of movies. You want to throw it in anytime, any place, anywhere, I'm there for it.
Okay. So and of course Waterloo. For a while, Waterloo was actually watchable on YouTube. I don't know if that's still the case or not. These things tend to disappear after a while.
No, it's still there with additional scenes.
Yeah, but with like what it was 30,000 Red Army soldiers were the extras in there. So I mean, every obviously early 70s pre CGI. Some of those like had the cavalry charges where they recreate the painting of the charge of the British cavalry, just insane. You will never see a cavalry charge like that on film again.
No, it bookends with Bodarchuk's War and Peace,
which I have not seen.
Which is it's 8 hours of movie to get to 2 hours of battle.
Okay.
But it's Austerlitz and Borodino are also both of that quality. Borodino's better.
Let me see if I can lower volume. Is that Jeff? Is that any better? Maybe we'll move it a little bit more. That should help equalize the volume so folks can tune it on their end. So sorry about that. We did not synchronize that ahead of time, and it sounds okay to me. So because I hear my own voice in my head, I can't hear my own volume, and I am almost always louder than everybody else. So totally worth your time. Yeah, this is the early 70s Rod Steiger Waterloo. It's totally worth your time. So
you can watch it for free.
Yeah, that's true. It's on YouTube, which means you can not only watch it for free, but you can watch it in pieces if you want to. So you don't have, because it's pretty long, so you don't have to sit down and watch it all in one sitting if you don't want to. The advantage of watching stuff on the internet, generally speaking. So when we talk about Kriegspiel, we're talking about the Kriegspiel that we're talking about tonight. We are emphatically not talking about the legendarily terrible Tom Shaw Kriegspiel that Avalon Hill released in the early 70s. Jim, have you ever played that or even talked to anybody who's tried to play that? Because I have it.
It's sitting on my shelf behind me.
It's legend. I have a copy too.
I thought it was.
But
when I got into this Kriegspiel thing very early, and I thought there was no such thing as an internet or a board game geek
Mm-hmm.
that I could go to and discover that it was nothing of the kind.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh yeah. Oh yeah, bought it, tried to play it, couldn't make a lick of sense out of it. It said clearly it must be my fault. Came back to it a couple months later, still didn't make any sense, and I kept it. But oh my God, is that game bad?
No, it's trash. It's trash. It's trash. It might be the worst thing. I can't speak with clarity on a lot of Avalon Hill's non-wargame offerings, but it might be the worst thing Avalon Hill ever did. Realistically,
Outdoor survival is worse.
Oh, maybe. You know, it was one of their top sellers for a long time. Of course, the reason for that is because White Box, the little booklet D&D, told people, if you want wilderness rules, go buy Avalon Hill's Outdoor Survival. And it was, I had that too, and I sold it off, and I never tried to play it. It looked novel, but I can't speak to why anybody... Other than as, you know, wilderness rules for D&D, I can't speak to why anybody would want to play it.
My wife is an astonishingly even-tempered woman. If you want to get her mad, suggest she play wilderness survival.
So she's played it.
We played it.
Okay.
Because she has a rule in my house. I'm blessed. I have a wonderful wife and a wonderful son. Most of you know Velker, who's followed the channel. That will play games. Her rule is she will always play a game one time, and then she'll tell me what she thinks. She insisted I throw it out.
So you can't play it again, is what you're saying.
Yeah, she said, I never want to see this game in my house again. This game offends God, reason, and nature.
That's entirely plausible. Almost every, if not every, wargamer I talk to does not speak highly of outdoor survival. But there's a lot of, remember they did Powers and Perils too. So, sure. I mean, if you start stepping out of wargaming, you're kind of on your own. I'm sure Eric Dott was delighted with outdoor survival because it sold really well for the reason I just mentioned, because it was piggybacking onto the D&D craze. It was a top seller for several years for Avalon Hill.
Oh, and it was also one of their boxes that they could get into mass market stores.
That's interesting.
Before Target started stocking board games, you could get outdoor survival at bookstores. You could get outdoor survival at sporting goods stores.
I'm pretty sure I never set foot in a sporting goods store during the lifespan of outdoor survival. But, I remember seeing it at places like Walden Books and stuff like that. If it was Walden Books, what was the predecessor of Walden Books?
B. Dalton.
B. Dalton's. I thought it was Walden Book. I forget what order that happened in. But in any case, so I'll let you answer this, Jim, because you probably know more about this than I do. Wasn't there a?
Yes, there's a battle. It was done by Command Magazine.
Okay.
I actually included it in my. I did a 3-part piece for Armchair Dragoons on the different simulations of the Battle of Waterloo, and that's in there. I think it's just called Hoover.
Okay.
It's not bad because it's definitely low level. It's definitely skirmishy, but it's there. Yeah, it's quite good.
Okay. I've seen it. I knew it. It existed. I was thinking it was an S&T rather than a Command magazine, but thinking about it, you're totally right. It was a Command magazine. I never owned it though, or did I? I don't know. It's hard to keep track of that stuff sometimes. Anyway, so the Prussian General Staff Kriegspiel. Jim, you want to give us a nickel tour of the original Kriegspiel that Avalon Hill stole the name from and didn't do anything else with?
Sure. One of the stories of the Napoleonic Wars, of course, is that in 1806 and on through 1807, the Prussian army gets smacked around fairly handily by Napoleon. Leads to a lot of rethinking, and one of the things Napoleon famously said was, "It is best if you don't fight the same enemy many times because they will learn from you your whole war." Well, the Persians did, and one of the things that they learned is the importance of having a staff college, and they really do set the standard for a lot of the 19th century for the best overall staff college. And one of the things that happens is you get a young gentleman by the name of von Reiswitz, who he's not young. He's an officer. He serves in the Napoleonic Wars, and he comes forward with an idea. And it originally doesn't look like it does now. When I went to Berlin 3 years ago now, I made a point to go to the Charlottenburg Palace where the original Kriegspiel set is, and it is an astonishing work of craft. I had to very nearly bribe the guard to let me open the cabinet that had the pieces in it. But it was a lovely, lovely game, which is all Kriegspiel means, is war game. And it was intended to be a simulation of, and it was intended to be geomorphic. It was geomorphic from the beginning. They have tiles that are about 8 inches across. They were plaster, and they were painted. They're ceramic. They're ceramic and they're painted. And then they all fit onto these boards that fold out into this really, really lovely way. And he devised these rules for it, for a double-blind game that could be played by Prussian officers. When, there's this famous story that when it is first presented to the senior ministers of the Prussian government, the statement is made: "This is not a game; it is a preparation for war." And several sets are ordered. Von Reiswitz himself likely had mental issues and dies under very unfortunate circumstances, but his game goes on to influence an entire century's worth of military trainers, and it goes through several iterations. The first version is dated typically to 1812. We don't know much about the 1812. What we do know a lot about is the 1824, which is the version you can purchase from Two Fat Lardies and was translated a couple decades ago by Bill Leeson. And it's Leeson's translations of the Lardies reset. It goes through multiple modifications. And then eventually it gets adopted by the British and in America. So by the end of the 19th century, it's being played by staff colleges really all over Western Europe, and becomes a normative way of trying to simulate warfare with actually having guys march around in the field and getting guys killed.
So I suspect I did know, but had forgotten that the Two Fat Lardies do have a Kriegspiel set that you can buy. But I think there's, first of all, I think there's pictures online of the original or in early Kriegspiel sets, I think, yes. Which are really neat to see, by the way. And actually in the book Playing at the World, I want to say there's John Peterson in that book talks, it's a book about D&D, but he talks a lot about its evolution out of wargaming. I think he might have some Kriegspiel set pictures in there as well.
Well, and that to me is probably the most important point. You made the comment that the NDSM is LARPing for wargamers.
Mm-hmm.
I would almost make the counterpoint that from its very beginning, D&D is a wargame. D&D does not exist as we know it without the Kriegspiel.
Yeah.
And Playing at the World points this out, and there's another book that just came out that makes sort of the same point. The idea of an impartial umpire describing the world, characterizing the combat, describing the combat, that comes straight from the Kriegspiel, it comes straight from Reiswitz.
Yeah, and I mean, to me that seems pretty obvious. I mean, it was intended, based on my understanding, which mostly comes from you, as a refereed experience from the beginning. And I know there's so then we talk about like the von Reiswitz Kriegspiel, which sounds pretty mechanical to me, versus the, I think, later development of free Kriegspiel. Can you talk a little bit about free Kriegspiel?
Sure. The original 1812 and 1824 Kriegspiel is very Prussian in a whole lot of ways. And it's got an elaborate set of tables, which interestingly enough, and friend of Wargaming, friend of Armchair Dragoons, Command Post Games has actually done a set of dice when they originally did the Kriegspiel, all the combat tables weren't combat tables; they were on dice.
I've seen the pictures of them.
You would roll dice, and you would look at that die, and that gave you the entire combat table for as many as 8 different situations. Units firing in line, artillery firing to good effect, howitzers setting buildings on fire, all these other things, as well as melee outcomes. And depending on what the combat situation was, the umpire would roll a different dice. Well, those were all, as the Lardies point out, if you buy the Lardies book, that's where you'll get them. They derived those onto a table. Well, either way, though, you're tracking, and one of the things that's missing in most Kriegspiel sets that you'll see is a series of they look like cribbage boards, pegged counters where you're tracking individual casualties by half battalion.
Okay.
And that can and remember, Kriegspiel in its original incarnation breaks down into 2-minute segments. So it's show me 2 minutes of action. Yes, we can speed things up if we've got 2 troops that are far apart from each other, but at its heart, it's 2 minutes apart. All that gets really, really slow, really, really tedious. And a guy particularly by the name of Verdi Vermandois comes along and says, wait a minute, we've got some incredibly talented people, knowledgeable generals, knowledgeable commanders. They know what a good decision and a bad decision is. So he evolves what becomes known as a free Kriegspiel. And what is freeing about it is he said, we might have some chance in it, but the premise is still going to be an umpire, 2 sets of maps, and then a 3rd master map. You're going to move your troops according to set rates and all that other stuff. But particularly in the area of combat and any kind of situation that comes up in the game, we're going to let the umpires decide based on simple die rolls and their common sense what the outcomes are. So, for example, in a free Kriegspiel, rather than trying to adjudicate what happens when 450 men in a half battalion fire at good effect uphill, he's going to say, well, all right, on a 1 to 4, that's going to be this many guys. And, and frankly, and I'll give him a shout out, Dr. James Starrett, who's obviously, a friend of all wargaming out at the War College. When he runs it, he always apologizes to me directly because he knows I'm looking at him askance because he ain't running the 1824. He's just using common sense to keep it moving. And so the free Kriegspiel is very much more along the lines of, all right, so these guys are facing this guy. These guys are facing these guys. All right, they're on the flank. All right, they're better troops. And they're really, really tired. So this happens. Get going. Get to the next moment in the battle. And there's a huge emphasis on that, especially as, let's call it, the 1870s and the 1880s roll on.
So let me know, audience, if that adjustment that I just made to the sound improves the balance situation. So I just turned, StreamYard has an automatic volume adjustment, and I turned it off and turned myself down so that Jim would would be a little louder. So let me know if that fixes the problem. Okay, so we're now up to 18 something. Did this sort of either historical version of Kriegspiel continue to get played? When did this get picked up by hobbyists, right? As something you would do for fun and not because you're a professional military officer?
Well, I think it's always in wargaming. I mean, we are playing Kriegspiels. We are playing something like the Kriegspiel all through World War I, World War II. It's out there. It's being done. Obviously, there is wargaming in a different form. We all know the story of the gaming of Pearl Harbor. We know the story of how Fletcher Pratt evolved from actual naval war games and things like that. But the Kriegspiel in the form that we know it, a double-blind refereed game, never goes away. But what it does is it falls out of favor as a simulation. People start to doubt it, whether or not it's whether it's a substitute. And you see it take on other forms. Probably the most significant is the toot, the tactical exercise without troops, which involved, and the staff ride and things like that, which evolve from it. So where does it become? It is certainly at the Rand Corporation at the time that some of those Rand men and women are beginning to evolve what become commercial war games. There's a reason that Roberts can see the title and can use it in a game. It's because it's in the air. I've tried a lot to think who's the first person to recapture the double-blind game. When does Kriegspiel go naval?
So does Fletcher Pratt come up with that?
Fletcher Pratt is a whole nother study. And it absolutely fascinates me. We've played Fletcher Pratt on my channel a bunch.
I've seen it.
I've actually been invited.
I have mocked you for it, in fact.
Good. Deservedly. I have a good friend who is the chief psychologist, I think he's the chief now, down at the Great Lakes Naval Base in Illinois. And he has asked me to come down and run Fletcher Pratt for some of the midshipmen down there. just because it's such a creative exercise. But Fletcher Pratt was a cultural phenomenon. It is impossible to describe. And I've pulled a lot of the news articles. I mean, this made the New Yorker, it made the New York Times, it made Life magazine. And the pictures are unimaginable in our modern setting. I suppose it goes to the fact that we didn't have a lot of good TV and maybe, there was no Mandalorian to tune into. But when you look at those pictures, the ones that blow me away probably more than any other are all these guys and women in pencil skirts and pumps literally down with their face pressed to the floor, measuring
line of sight
distances or guessing their ranges and writing them down. And he had dozens of people who made it a social event. But to answer that particular question, the Japanese Imperial Navy prior to Tsushima is playing a form of the Kriegspiel that they learned from the British.
Okay. I can tell you that there is an anecdote in Isaac Asimov's autobiography, one of his 3 volumes of autobiography, where he went over to some social event at Fletcher Pratt's place, and they're playing Fletcher Pratt on the floor. All these, a bunch of sci-fi writers are there, and a bunch of, New York City arts and culture people, and Fletcher Pratt's running this naval war game for them on his apartment floor.
It's there. The point is, it's always there. The problem is, it's a niche phenomenon at a time when the world's at war. But yeah, the Japanese have it prior to the Russo-Japanese War. They've got it before that. They're playing the stuffing out of it prior to their attack. Prior to their actions in the Second World War, leading up to Pearl Harbor. So they've got it there, and obviously we've got it, and the British have it. And there's all kinds of black and white photography of different sides playing different war games of a naval variety prior to and up through World War II. So there's a whole lot of it out there. The first commercial one is I've got a bunch of booklets that people put out. It's probably Bill Leeson, and it's probably, so you figure that's 1982. In terms of when he actually retranslates it and puts it back out as a booklet. But it's an incredible, because the thing is, and Paddy Griffith, the late Dr. Paddy Griffith, he makes the point that and I'm open to this criticism, that we began to fetishize, went right at the very time when the Kriegspiel might really have taken off in hobby wargaming. Let's say 1951 to 55. We started to fetishize the soup of the day, whiskey. We started to fetishize the miniature. We fell in love with minis, and
so you're blaming it all on those miniatures perverts again.
As one of said perverts, I don't know as I can blame anybody but myself. And he wrote before his death that he thinks it was one of the big turning points in the history of gaming, where we started to fall in love with, and we started then to try to figure out all the problems that miniatures cause, right? The frontage of a division or of a battalion is this, but this dude is 1 inch tall. Well, how does that work? He's 80 feet tall, and we started to try to square that circle really unnecessarily when Paddy pointed out, and when Paddy gets around to writing his seminal book on the topic, Napoleonic Wargaming for Fun, most of his gaming centers around profound abstraction.
We promise not to make fun of the miniatures degenerates anymore this tonight. I promise nothing, actually.
Fetishization. There you go. But so to me, when his book comes out, he gives so much space for his command game, which is a Kriegspiel. He actually talks about a map Kriegspiel. He talks about a siege Kriegspiel. And he's really trying to sort of turn the heads of all these hobby gamers and say, hey guys, gals, we could play this. This is, it doesn't necessarily have to be about whether the dolman on this guy is the exact right color, or whether this guy would have worn a Belgic or a stovepipe or a regular shako. It's more, how do we get at the problems of war and of war gaming?
Mm-hmm. Somebody sent me, and I'm trying to remember where I got this, because I'd really like to look at it again now that we're talking about this. A program from like Origins 5. I'd be curious to look at old Origins, or of course Gen Con's older than Origins, so Gen Con might be a better example, but I don't have that documentation to see what sort of this sort of open format RPG-esque or proto RPG-esque types of things were getting played back then. I know that at one of the very early Gen Cons, at Gen Con 2 or 3 or whatever it was, they played the Braunstein or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, that was like the immediate predecessor to D&D, where it's like the critical. I mean, I felt like the critical innovation there was that you controlled one person, right? Now in Kriegspiel, you're kind of going back to the wargaming model of you're a commander, but you're playing a person, right? You're playing a person who is the commander of some troops, and you may not have, depending on how cruel the referee is, you may or may not have perfect control over those troops, and certainly you don't have perfect control over the information that you are getting as a commander, unlike the standard tabletop board game war games, where you have some approximation of perfect intel, right? I can see that there's something there in most games, unless there's dummies, which is there are some games that have dummy units, but that's a minority of games. So you have an idea that there's troops there. I can see that the stack is 5 counters high, so I know there's a bunch of troops there, right? There's assumptions you can make depending on the game system. So I talk about that, about the way it gets run at Origins nowadays, whether that happens this year or maybe folks have to wait for next year. Although I think there's probably still slots open in the Kriegspiel that you're running for the Armchair Dragoons in a week? Yeah.
Armchair Dragoon.
That's this week, actually.
Yeah, it's this coming weekend.
Link in the description.
I'm actually indulging my my miniatures perversions over the weekend. I'm running a game, cheap pop. I'm running a game of What a Tanker for Two Fat Lardies. We're doing the Cannonball Run, and then I'm doing for LaSalle 2. I'm doing the Battle of La Haye Sant. What I've been doing for the past 6 months now, and it'll keep rolling right along until it's done, is running a. Here we go. Hey, David, it's wonderful to see you always, man. Grog of the Year. Whoa.
The very fashionably dressed David Thompson.
Always a delight to see him. And you talk about, and I'm not just going to say this because he's sitting right there out in the audience. You talk about guys that want to think differently about games. There's my guy. And is really making us think. Talking about challenging our assumptions. But anyway, it's funny you mention that, because I sometimes think, as guided by Dr. Griffith, it's one of those things where I wonder if we haven't spent 40 years trying to stuff back into this sack of gaming, this thing that we always had there when we had the Kriegspiel. What do I mean? You know how much I love OSG. You know how much I love Zucker's games. I really do think that they're wonderful. What is the thing? I even typed it on a chat into your very show. What's the one thing he doesn't do? He doesn't give us enough flipping counters to put on top of our stacks to give us.
You have to cannibalize the other games to do it.
Yeah, I got to go running around my other games. I've told Kevin in an email, just sell me sheets of counters. I will buy them from you. For God's sake, man. That and shrink wrap your games. You won't do either. The old hippie. Anyway, and I my respect for this guy could not be greater. But anyway,
I have no idea what it costs to get your stuff shrink wrapped. So
I don't think it's that. I think it's an ecological thing with him.
Oh, okay. I mean that's reasonable. At least the cardboard is.
Like I say, he is kind of. Like I say, my respect couldn't be greater. But my point is, we spend all our time trying to put that fog of war back in, and it's so much to me that it was all in a Kriegspiel. It's already there. It's already there. The minute we went out onto the tabletop with our minis, the minute we went into Hex Encounters with our chits and whatever, we automatically rebuilt back the problem of fog of war. We've had Simmons's games. Unfortunately, I gather she has left the game design community, which is a real shame.
That's my understanding, and I'm guessing there's a story that she did not share that I saw. So if that sounds unfortunate, let me put it that way.
Well, yeah, and I know that she had health problems over the years.
couldn't be a more class act. I screwed up a Friedrich board 100 years ago, and she replaced it without a question. I mean, just so great. But Napoleon's Triumph and the other two games in that series, Bonaparte at Marengo and the Gettysburg one, those built in fog of war. And also, let it be said, I've made this comment in an Armchair Dragoons podcast. You know, we sometimes people will look at Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and go, well, that's obvious. Yeah, but you didn't think of it first. And I've always wished I could have been there the first time that Grant Dalglish flipped over a block and turned it on its side and went, hey, I can hide information this way.
I'm guessing that if Grant made that innovation, that he was an infant at the time and knocked the block over. That's got to be Tom.
I meant Tom. You're right.
I was going to say that because I've met Grant. He's younger than me.
Young. Yeah. Absolutely. So, no, I meant you're right. Quite correct. But yeah, it's all those innovations. What was their function? Trying to stick fog of war back in, where since 1812 we'd had it. Because as the Lardis correctly pointed out when they started their own little revolution, because it was one of the things that von Reiswitz and the original Kriegspielers and those who went into staff colleges said was, it's what we call friction, right? And building that into a game is, if it's not there ab initio, can seem a little bit awkward. And I think that those games that have built it in from the ground up are the ones that have succeeded the most.
So we have a question from Kyle about ex-DARPA wargame designer Ezra Sidrian, who I have no idea who that is.
I am an Ezra Sidrian nerd of the first order of magnitude. He designed this little bitty game called Universal Military Simulator 101 years ago. And I wanted to play that so much when I was a kid. I was a Commodore kid, and it was not for the Commodore. You had to have an Atari ST. And then I wanted to have it for the Amiga, and he only got around to it for the Amiga forever. He is designing, and I'm a beta tester for General Staff. It's been a bunch of years in development. It is a Kriegspiel at its root. It is first and foremost a Kriegspiel, and is incredibly exciting for that reason. Ezra is best, his work, his professional work at the university he was a developer of AI. And if he can bring his iterative tools to this game, it's going to have one of the most dominating AIs you've ever seen. It's exciting. He's been poking at it for a long time. I hope he can actually get it out the door. The latest beta build was honestly still pieces and parts. I want to see him to get it all hang together, but I am never let it be doubted. I'm rooting like crazy for him.
Well, that definitely answers that question. So to sum up, for those who missed the early discussion on this, there is an Avalon Hill title called Kriegspiel, which bears no relation to the historical military staff Kriegspiel, which was probably developed by the Prussians and von Reiswitz. And then other things that we might call Kriegspiel evolved later out of that. What one typically sees at a convention nowadays is what Jim has talked about, called free Kriegspiel, which is basically just a loosey-goosey way of kind of running it strictly out of the referee's understanding of military affairs, rather than having a fairly elaborate set of adjudication mechanisms.
But I will say one thing in our defense, and that is when we've run it recently at Origins, and it's funny because this goes to John Longshore's question. One of the things that I wanted to do, and some of my friends really wanted to do, and Dr. James Starrett wanted to do, was give people maybe not an authentic, because that's too detailed, most people wouldn't put up with it, but a feel for what a Kriegspiel was really like in 1824. And what he does, and it's really cool, and I think you've seen it, is we set up these study carrels, these cardboard carrels, and everybody gets an authentic piece of one of the seminal maps, the Meckel map. And they get a little piece of it, and they get a few troops. Typically, it's not more than probably a brigade. You get a couple battalions that are looped together, maybe a cavalry unit in support, and you get a situation. And at that point, it's a 4-hour game at most. Usually we're running 2s. So there's no time to goof around. But what's key is, and what we show them is, you're sitting in this carrel and you can't see anybody else. You can't see the master map. You see what your troops see on that map with these little pieces. And You then have a pad of paper and you write your orders. Now, James Starrett has this gentleman who helps us, who has this booming voice, and he just walks up and down and says, and announces the time clock and drives it forward and says, 2 minutes to orders, 2 minutes to orders. And you've got to write, you got to get it fast. And he will then come by and show you what has happened in the previous 2 minutes. And we do give them that experience. And the crazy part is, and this is one of my greatest joys. Every single time we ran it, I had to give up my seat. I was sort of going to be a ringer. I always had to give up my seat because more people wanted to play. We have had old men. We've had young men. We have had young women. We've had children kind of come together as a group, and they can all play it. It makes sense because we don't burden them with the rules. We say, what do you want these troops to do? And it's a really cool, we ran games that typically ran to 16 people, ran them 2 to 3 hours, including time for a debrief. And every single one of the folks had a blast.
Because I was there that one time where there was the 1 hour dry run or whatever it was, and so many people wandered by that it filled up to like the next couple slots of Kriegspiels that were actually running. So I was in 2 of those games, I think. And that was, of course, at Origins, right? So this is kind of all happening out in this giant gaming hall that is like where they can't fit the entire convention in that gaming hall, but boy, they tried. They put as much of the action at Origins in that one huge noisy hall as they possibly could. And for the same reason, though, a lot of people probably did wander by. If that event had run off in a room upstairs somewhere, people wouldn't have wandered by and seen it, and wouldn't have had the privilege of participating in it later that day or the next day or whatever it was. So here's a good question. To what extent is training, how difficult or what training does the Kriegspiel referee need? Is this one of the reasons why it drops out of favor sometimes?
Absolutely.
But is it? Okay.
Training isn't the right word. I think it's sort of like, I think if you play in I would always tell people, play a bunch of games because they're fast. They're fast, and then get a gig in a good game. The more umpires you have, the better the game is. There's a gentleman there's still at Hemel Hempstead in England. There is a long running. He's probably 50 years old now. Kriegspiel group that plays there, and one of their guys comes over to Historicon every year and runs 2 Kriegspiels, and I've helped him. You play with the good ones and you learn how to be an umpire. I will say this. I'll turn this question just a little bit. The biggest problem is finding an umpire. Is finding an experienced umpire who's willing to do it. I could easily simultaneously probably run 4 Kriegspiels and have them fully subscribed. That's not because
you could.
I mean, it's that people. I would have people wanting to do it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
People know I'm running this Kriegspiel online through the Armchair Dragoons forum, and I get emails once or twice a month. Hey, do you have any slots? Put me on the reserve list. My reserve list is 12 people long right now.
I would recommend stopping by the Armchair Dragoons forum if this sounds so. Let me get this out. I wanted Jim on to talk about this because he's the go-to expert on this topic, right? At least available to hobby gamers. But I consider my relatively meager experience with with the Kriegspiels and with the command post exercises and with NSDM and stuff like that. That's not really traditional war games to have been super, super valuable. Even if the Kriegspiel is not something that I would necessarily want to participate in a weekly Kriegspiel group. I mean, that ain't me, but it was super valuable, and I would strongly recommend that anybody interested in war games do it at least once to see how it is and get that experience. That applies to whatever is happening at the convention this weekend, which is this weekend, and also to if you can swing by Origins either this fall, whenever that happens, assuming it's happening. or next year at Origins and stop by there and participate in some of those things. There's also the command post exercises. Who runs the command post exercises? Is that James as well?
Well, yes, James coordinates them. He's the scenario designer. He has my job. He knows this, and if the red dot ever appears on your forehead, that's me. And it's because he designs games to teach actual soldiers how to make command decisions. And one of the tools that they use is the Flashpoint series, which is done by some folks who are also the lead designers and the lead programmers are all armchair dragoons. They're friends of the dragoons that have been there forever. So it's a great pairing. He runs the external piece. And so the premise of the game is and going back to this point about the staff college, they divide up all the players into the roles that would be held by an actual contemporary staff college, broadly defined. And they then play against the computer. They play a scenario against the computer. So you have one person who is responsible for planning, another person who is futures, another person who is fires. I famously played the aviation wing in one game that got me my online nickname. And so they build this system in which they roll out the map, assign roles, they get a briefing, and then they run the simulation. And you will never see anywhere in gaming. I'll stand by this. I love miniatures. You won't see it at a miniatures table. There is nothing like having these guys and ladies standing in front of a TV screen or a monitor, watching their plan evolve and get shot to ribbons, and saying, "Oh my God, where did that come from? Where did that come from?"
That lines up with my experience. Yes.
Who the heck was responsible for scouting that? And then the real joy, Captain Darwin, Jim Snyder, one of the lead programmers, sitting right. And he, by the way, you'll see Jim's name all over the closely related Mark Walker designs that are in that Cold War Goes Hot series. The previous one that's just got the one that got the reboot. Why am I not remembering the name all of a sudden? It got the gigantic reboot with all the hundreds of thousands of boxes and pieces and parts, but it's the Cold War Goes Hot stuff that that David Heath put out.
World War 85.
That's it.
Yes.
And so
that does have exactly 1 million pieces.
Yeah, I believe that's it. That's the number. So you've got that guy who's running the game, and you've got James Starrett who's running the externals, and it creates some amazing. I've left some of those games exhausted. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean the amount of you think, well, this is a sedentary hobby, right? Bullshit. I got a lot of exercise, getting up, walking around, walking back and forth, walking this and walking there, and all that other stuff. All I mean, my natural volume level is relatively high, as we've seen this evening, and my voice got to work out doing that for 4 hours. So yeah, it's fairly exhausting for a fat, flatulent, and out of shape gamer such as myself to participate in that for 4 hours at an Origin after having spent a lot of the day walking around anyway.
Sure.
So I have no experience with the Avalanche Press Jutland. So I cannot speak to that at all. I assume it to be different than the Avalon Hill Jutland. But aside from that, I do not know anything about it.
No,
I want to say Gilbert's videos about the Avalon Hill one, though, is it not? Because I could be wrong about that as well.
No, I think Gilbert's video is about Avalon Hill.
Okay, I thought so, but
I
could be misremembering that.
Which you want to play Avalon Hill Jutland? You just call me, man. I love that game so much.
Jutland.
We actually snuck into my high school gym to play it the right way.
I have never played it, actually. I know that a lot of people, it still has quite a few people that like it. Let me put it that way. I had some youngster, and by youngster, I mean he was about 35, that I talked to extensively at Compass Expo when I was there about Jutland and how badly he wanted to play Jutland. It is playing it at authentic scale.
And there's there is a discussion in the pamphlet about how they had to shrink the scale to make it work. When you get to play it in the real scale, it is It's, you run around in your stocking feet. It's so much fun. It is. I absolutely understand the people that'll tell you it ain't say Krieg, it isn't all those other things, but it is what it is, and I love it.
And I know Larry Bond was mentioned at some point upstream as well. And of course, Larry's the harpoon guy.
Well, I got two things, because this right here, yes. I mean, flat top is the obvious one, because flat top is built for Kriegspiel.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a great point. I don't know why, because I've played Kriegspiel and I've played flat top, and the experience that I get out of flat top, which I've talked about many times about how much I love flat top, is actually a lot of the same lessons about Fog of War that you get out of Kriegspiel. You are also getting out of refereed flat top. That said, a lot of the rules in flat top are the way they are in an effort to alleviate the need for a referee. So you can play it without a referee and still get a good sense of Fog of War, but it's really cool to play it, on 3 boards with a referee too. So
yeah, but the other, that's that right there. That is some good stuff. People are coming in with these comments. Yeah, baby. Yeah. That's strong agree.
That box, worst box in the history of wargaming boxes, actually, was flat top. I am sure of it. I have never seen a copy of flat top that was like opened where the box was not wrecked in some way. So, and mine's in great shape, and it's still got like 4 blown corners.
Mine's a freaking disaster.
Oh, it's impossible. It's an impossible.
Yeah, no, mine is actually not in the original box. I just basically undid it because it wouldn't stack properly.
Yeah, you cannot get the pieces back in the box unpunched, let alone punch, because it fit airtight. I mean, that box was absolutely full. If it was opened at all, you had a hard time just getting it back in without sitting funny on the box and blowing corners on it.
No, you and I have I've watched you enough on this stream to know that you and I have the same trait, which is clip your corners with a proper with a proper Oregon laminator trimmer, and then put them into the little plastic bags labeled on the top, organized in whatever manner the game suggests is appropriate. My flat top is that way, but it's in a completely different box.
Yeah, the box is worthy only of the garbage. So I mean, the art's nice. I will say that. I'm trying to remember. The art on the Avalon Hill one is a nicer looking box art than the one on the Battle Line version, but the Battle Line counters are so thick that they're not fitting in anybody's corner rounder either. So there's that. One of the copies or if not 2 of the copies that we play our double blind game of flat top with is a Battle Line edition, and it's got ludicrously thick counters.
Yeah, I had to get my counters. I forget who made them. Somebody made extra counters so that I could make sure I had a double blind set.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a relatively expensive Avalon Hill game, especially if you want to make sure it's complete, which means in almost all cases it has to be unpunched, and you might want it in the shrink wrap, really, because unless you have good photos of the inside, you don't know if it's complete. Right?
That's good. That's a good point.
So, on the other hand, a lot of the counters are like generic counters. Like here's a counter of Dauntlesses or counter of Betty or Kate's or something like that. And so if you're missing a couple counters from a double blind set, it might not mean that much.
But I think
is a revision. It is not like a new version of flat top. That Southern Cross game from Compass is a different game. I've talked to the designer. And it definitely started. Yeah, it's called Under the Southern Cross or Beneath the Southern Cross, and Compass is actually talking about it now, although it's been in the works for some time. It started out as flat top, but he added more and more, and I expect it to resemble flat top in a general way, but it's gonna be its own thing. Still buying it. I'm good. So.
No, I think that, Jen, to the earlier question, I won't say many games that you wouldn't think can be turned into Kriegspiels with the right amount of effort and with a proper umpire. Mark, the same guy I was mentioning, one of the games I umpired for him was based on the One Small Step, City of Confusion, which itself is not a great game of the Battle of Way, but as a Kriegspiel, setting up the basic rules, setting up the map, setting up the premise, and he used the rules for combat adjudication. And then he just took his own understanding of the scenario and the troops. It was great. Absolutely great. 4-hour Kriegspiel.
Have you ever played any of those old GDW double blind games? They had a whole line of them, of which there were at least several different ones. I never played any of those.
Own all of them. I think I'd have to check myself, but I think I've got them all. Yeah. Okay. No. That was a wonderful. I mean, look, shoot, I got NATO division commander, so it's
a large collectible.
Well, all these. I'm fascinated by any game that is intended to be run as a Kriegspiel, right? And the GDWs certainly were. That one was. They're good. They're good. You've got to get. I still think, though, and one of the things that I've come to learn over the course of adjudicating the Kriegspiels that I have, the more intuitive, the more I don't want to say simple, because simple isn't necessarily the right word, but the more intuitive and the smoother and more polished the rules are, the better your Kriegspiel is going to be. Which is why I will always put in a plug. It's I won't say it's my favorite game because I got a lot that contend for that, but why the Flight of the Eagle is easily on my Mount Rushmore of greatest games ever designed. It is not a complicated system at all. But Dr. Didier Rouy, who is a French immigrant, he does all the Protestant edition Napoleonic games.
Okay.
Quatre Batailles and Espagne and all those things. He did a operational Kriegspiel, and those are the Kriegspiels I run in the Armchair Dragoons forum. They're all those maps. That's him. All the videos you see on my site. That's him. He and I are in touch. We communicate regularly on rules questions. He built a masterful system for running operational Kriegspiels. He went through 3 editions. The second and third add a lot of stuff. Frankly, I don't know too many people that try to use all this stuff. They usually stick to the first edition because of its elegance, its simplicity, and the way it really makes you feel like a Napoleonic commander. It is a very, very special game.
Speaking of, somebody asked this up the Reddit, and I'm not going to dig the comment out. And I'm also not going to make you choose in this way, but the favorite set of Napoleonic's miniatures rules.
Jerk.
That's probably a tough question by itself. I'm at least not limiting you to I'm at least limiting you to miniatures and not including like board war games too.
Yeah. I've actually posted to my Twitter feed my top 10 rules right now. And I stress that right now because a little bit of a look forward. The author of Absolute Emperor, the new Simple Play Blue Book series from Osprey Miniatures, he is going to be coming on my channel on Wednesday for Waterloo Week, and we're going to play Waterloo under his watchful eye. Fun system. But favorite Napoleonic miniatures? Well, we've got to talk scale, don't we?
Sure.
Favorite skirmish set? Sharp Practice 2, not close. Favorite big game set? Let's call it Grand Tactical. Blucher. I'm going to give it to Blucher. It still stays there. Favorite tactical set. That's where I've been challenged of late. I'm stuck between my beloved Shaco 2 and the new kid in town, LaSalle 2. Both of them are well worth considering. I'm going to give it ultimately to Shaco 2.
Okay, that's a great list. And of course, I do the same thing. I mean, I change my mind from time to time. Right now, I'm feeling particularly, for reasons we'll go into next week, particularly favorable toward GTS again, for example. But I was actually going to talk about this week, and then I remembered, oh yeah, Jim's coming out this week. We won't talk about that. There's news out of the GTS community that the long-awaited new version of Market Garden has been canceled. So
I saw that.
I will be complaining about that next week. I get where Multiman's coming from on this, unfortunately, but it's a shame that we won't see. I take the fact that they said that it's canceled as it's canceled and not we're just pushing this down the line 5 years, so we'll do it later. That's not the impression I have, unfortunately. So, but while you can. And you have several months, if anybody's interested, and I highly recommend it game that there will be a reprint of the Devil's Cauldron later this year. So check that out. We'll talk about it in later depth next week. But yeah, I mean, my top. That's why I don't really do top lists, because I change my mind all the time, right? I mean, yeah, I'm super into Civil War, and then I want to go back to East Front, right? Because we just played a particularly satisfying session of OCS. So I completely get that. But I will also say that I haven't changed my mind on, I guess, grand tactical is what I'll call it, Napoleonics, where I land with the Library of Napoleonic Battles. You've probably played, what's the Frederick Bay system, Jour de Gloire, though, where I have it. How's that?
I don't know if there's a need for it.
Okay.
That's not to say that I don't like it, which is weird. I've played a bunch of them. I certainly have not played them all. I just kind of got
a lot of them.
Oh yes. Oh, it's ancient. It's a very old system,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not as old as well. I suppose it depends how you define NLB, how far back it goes. Do you go all the way back to 1976, or LNB? Sorry. Do you go back that far? I don't know. It's an old system.
Wikipedia. Board Game Geek does. They count Napoleon's last battles as
sure. I mean, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Okay. I see the blood. I see the bloodline. How's that?
Yeah.
And that's fine. And every war gamer should own Napoleon's last battles. That is my view. Because I don't know that there really is a better treatment of the. See here. Ooh.
I assume he's pulling your leg, by the way.
Oh God Almighty! No! I just can't stand it. I can't stand it. I played it. Come on, I played it. This is Courses for Horses, DCB. I've tried. Oh my God, have I tried?
You guys might as well be speaking ancient Hittite, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no.
Stuff, by the way.
Carnage of Glory is a very popular system, and what I would always say to people is, you're going to hear what people like Artie and I say, and then you should go play the games and find out for yourself, and you'll see if we're full of crap or not. I mean, that's, and I'm certainly open to the idea that what I like, you may not. The oh my God, Fate and Glory.
I know you have an opinion on these.
Oh, don't get me wound up on this. This is such a tragedy. I think that the 20 system, which is obviously Fate and Glory, is one of the great lost opportunities from that handshake. Well, I'm still mad. The guys at Armchair Dragoons will tell you, you may be able to verify this. I was enraged when I found out what had happened with Victory Point Games. I lost my mind. I'm like, wait, Victory Point Games is here at Origins? This is so cool. And it's a freaking zombie game, and I get it. Dude wanted to sell his company. Dude was mad at California for its taxation. Dude had all his reasons. That's his company. It's not mine. I don't got any say. I get it. Business. But because now the 20 system, which is a wonderful introductory system, you could teach it to a kid. And it's it's got great flavor.
Or an exceptionally stupid adult.
But
as Joe Moore used to say.
You could play it. It's fun, light, fast. It ends quickly, but it teaches the battle, got decent maps, and it's operational. So it's swirling and all this good stuff. And they put out Fate and Glory, which were all these battles where Napoleon loses, and they gave it the GMT treatment. Higher quality components, lovely maps, nice rules, great, loved it. And they came out and they said, now we're going to do Rising Glory, which was going to be Austerlitz and Friedland and Jena. They were going to redo Jena, because Jena, I think, was the first one, Jena 20. And they kept redoing it and promising it. But they also said they were going to get around to doing Leipzig 20, which I really wanted. And for whatever reason, it just stuck on the GMT 500 and never went anywhere. And they sold the rights back, or they worked out, I don't know if they sold it. They worked out the deal to give it back to VPG, where it sits. So bottom line, play Fate and Glory. So
it's
fun.
From Decision.
Don't make me turn off this camera. Don't make me turn off this camera.
Just imagine Stigler right now losing his mind. I am not making that up. It has been arranged that future publication of games in that series will be from Decision Games. Sorry to be the bearer of bad. It's good news, right? I mean, it's gonna.
No.
It's good news, right?
They will figure out some way to turn it into a game with tanks. That's what they will do. I just, my hatred of decision games and so many of the decisions that's made about my beloved Napoleonic games is wide and deep.
But their Wellington's victory is so good.
You know, have you set up Wellington's victory ever?
No, I haven't. I don't have their version of it, but I understand it's.
No. I'm saying, have you set up the good versions, not their junk version?
No, I actually only obtained it like sometime last year. Actually, I have a TSR version.
To go to our previous conversation, I've got it clipped in bags, set out nicely, all this other stuff, and I every once in a while I lay out the maps on my big tables behind me. I just set them up and I look at them, and I remember what they said, that this was their intention to make a Napoleonic squad leader, and I say, I am never going to play this again. I am never. But I love looking at it. Oh, it's so glorious and wonderful. Even though it's all those classic SSI beiges and oranges and off greens. Somebody on my Twitter feed set it up in honor of the week. Hey, by the way, this is Waterloo Week. Happy Waterloo Week, everybody.
This is Waterloo Week. We have already mentioned it, actually.
Have we? I missed it. Sorry.
You mentioned it. I didn't mention it. Yeah. Waterloo. He's wearing his Napoleon shirt.
I am.
And his Napoleon hat.
I am wearing
his Napoleonic study.
I am wearing one of my Napoleonic shirts. I have others.
He's got an entire Napoleonic wardrobe.
But no, at Carnage and Glory. Carnage and Glory is a miniatures game. It is very popular at Historicon. It is played very often. I have participated in games there. And the big thing about it is it purports to use real world measurements. It's a computer game. It's run by a computer. It's a miniatures game adjudicated by a computer. So every unit has to have a little tag on it that tells you what number it is, so that can be logged in by the computer guy.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That sounds astonishingly not fun. Actually.
Buck Surdu, really good guy, one of the founder of the Hawks miniatures games out in the East Coast. He gave me a rule once that I keep with me, and I apply it to miniatures games. I think it applies to board games, but that's really more your thing. His rule is, go to a miniatures table at a convention. If you're interested in the rules, go up and watch the game. Sort of make mental notes. Look all over the field. Look where everybody is. Then come back 1 hour later. Has the game state changed substantially? If it hasn't, don't buy those rules. It's just not worth your time.
See, also, Europa.
Nah!
Yeah. So that was literally the joke we would tell each other every year at Europa Fest at Origins. Was, we'd go in there on Friday morning and see where the East Front was, and then we'd go in there again on Sunday morning and see where the East Front was, and some years we couldn't tell the difference. So
it's like them dudes that play Labatt, the big Labatt games at Origins. And look, if that is your jam, you should do that and nothing else. And guess what? That's all they do and nothing else.
Yeah. That's
and God bless him.
I mean, one of the local Labatt guys does do other stuff, right? I mean, he plays OCS and Labatt. But for a lot of people, this is true of ASL too. It's true of WIF. I mean, people, they're detailed enough. They're rich enough that they can be your entire hobby if you want them to be.
Sure.
You're either playing them that way or you're playing them very casually because you don't want that to be your entire hobby. And you don't have the bandwidth to...
Jason Pipes put up a crazy... Jason Pipes, who sells a lot of things through the Concept Marketplace on Facebook. Mm-hmm. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I bought my Devil's Gauntlet from him, actually.
Yeah, I've never had hey, anybody out there, you're looking to buy games, a lot of places to go, but Jason won't go wrong. Just going to say, I'll vouch.
Got my Imperium Romana. I bought several big games from Jason, actually. So
and I've never been sad. And I dumped some money with him, but he was offering an ASL set, and it wasn't complete because somehow that strikes me as more theoretical than real. But it was vast.
I remember that set recently, right? Like in the last 2 weeks. Yeah, it was an enormous set, and he wanted like $1,500 for it, but it was worth 5 times that.
Yeah, and I looked at it and I said, if you're going to get in, this is the end I want you in. I said that to myself. I said, this is the end I want in on, because God Almighty, to your point, it really does seem like people derive a lot out of their ASL experience. And God bless them for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you go to the ASL Oktoberfest or any of the other big ASL events, of which there's more than one. That's just the one I've been to. And it's those guys are large, and there's all guys that I can recall. It's been a while. But they're very focused, and by and large, that is the only game they play.
Yeah.
Is ASL.
I wish I could find that peace of mind.
Yeah, I'm not that kind of gamer. I just don't behave that way. So I think Jeff's answer here is that there's no particular need for Kriegspiel to be Napoleonic. I think it often is, though. What's your experience with non-Napoleonic Kriegspiels? No reason you can't do it.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. NDSM is a Kriegspiel. NDSM is a Kriegspiel, which covers any number of topics. What is a Kriegspiel? To me, a Kriegspiel is an umpired game with defined roles for each participant, where there's some element of fog of war driven by the umpire, creating that friction. It's really that simple. And then, of course, because there are Kriegspiels, though they're called war games, that aren't about wars. There are Kriegspiels that are about, all sorts of other things. Tabletop exercises and things like that are Kriegspiels in theory. Some of the best Kriegspiels I've ever played in. I played in an ancient Roman one, where we were each Roman commanders set from our camps to subjugate a part of Gaul, and each of us was given a unique goal, and we each had to achieve that goal. If you have ever checked out my video channel, I have run a game of Paddy Griffith's Men Against Fire. I've run several of them. It's a squad-level blind Kriegspiel set in World War II. I always play in the bocage. I've been meaning to do Eastern Front, but I've been playing in the bocage. I've run it 3 times, once for the Georgetown Wargaming Group. So we've done that. The greatest Kriegspiel ever played, in my judgment, was World War II. It was run by Paddy Griffith, umpired, as it turns out, by a young Richard Clark of Two Fat Lardies, who is now just turned 60. It was Operation Sea Lion. And if you buy one of John Curry's books about Kriegspiel, you can read all about it. It was run by the BBC. It was run out of Duxford, out of the military museum there. And they actually had some of the people on both sides, German and British, who actually fought the battle, making the decisions in the Kriegspiel. And this was aired live by the BBC, and they came to some really substantial and very interesting conclusions.
That's neat.
It's great. I mean, it's truly great. And it involved, I think, 40 players. And they were divided up into teams.
Some of those Dynasty M games have 50, 60, 100 people in them too. So, I mean, there's no reason why that can't work.
No.
So
it was great.
Yeah, for those, Jim, you'll remember Europa Fest, I'm sure.
Sure.
That was like when there was a Europa room at Origins, which was the case until 12 years ago or so. But I can even tell you exactly where they are. We're up where the independent RPG stuff is right now. But at Origins, that is on the Hyatt side. But yeah, I mean, they always had that other stuff going on too. But the centerpiece of the event was always the big East Front game that they made minimal progress on because it takes like 6 hours to run one turn. So they would get about 2 turns in a day, and so in 4 days they would get about 4 months. Is their bi-week? They're 2-week turns. So
yeah, they did this. They did the same thing at Gen Con.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I remember it at Origins better because it stuck around. At least that. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. But I haven't been to Gen Con since, like I said, it moved from Milwaukee. So
I went for a number of years. I mean, I'm here, right? So just like you in Columbus, it was an easy scoot for me. But it was interesting. I knew the guys who were playing Fletcher Pratt. I knew the guys who were playing Europa, and I knew the guys who were playing Johnny Reb. And so I would those are my hangs in addition to just checking out the sites. So. trying to think. It's been a long. I will admit, it's a long time. I'll fish out the program. No, I know they don't influence.
Well, if they don't, why are you doing it then?
Yeah, I mean,
because you enjoy accounting.
And look, I maybe I gotta give it another shot. Maybe I do. I didn't like it. I did not like it at all. I know that.
And that's okay.
The one thing about and if you love it, that's what you should do. The one thing, and maybe where I'm being unfair, that is the Historicon, in which I engaged in my 14 to 18 hour Shaco orgy. Where I had signed up to play an Austerlitz game. That's why I came to Historicon. I wanted to play in this giant Austerlitz game. And one of the nice things about Historicon is you wind up with a bunch of other people who will say to you, "Hey, you like this? Well, I got one too, and I got 2 seats. Can you come?" And so you go over to that game, and then you meet other people there, and they go, "Hey, I'm running one too." And I think I went to 4 consecutive games. And little sleep. And then the next day is when I played Carnage and Glory. And it might have even been Carnage and Glory 1. You have to tell me what the version numbers are. So yeah, the more I talk, the more I wonder if I'm not being unfair. All right. I'm not about buying another rule set. Are you kidding me?
Certainly not. Or planning another trip to Historicon.
Oh, that's true too. Well, no, and I very much want to get out there soon.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier drive for me than it is for you. It's central. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, they're back in. My understanding is they're back at. They're not at the host. They're at the convention, but they're back in. Why am I blanking?
Is it Lancaster?
Yeah, they're back in Lancaster. Yep.
Okay, because that's Eastern VA. I'm not driving. I've driven that. I'm not driving that anymore.
Yeah, no, I tended to fly into Philadelphia and drive back.
That's worse.
Or Baltimore. My wife who arranges my travel, correct?
Okay. See, I mean, I've driven to Philly from Cleveland, and it was a terrible drive. So it's a long drive, and it's a lot of rural Pennsylvania where you drive through post-industrial wasteland, shall we say, of coal mine country. There's no coal mines anymore because they ran the mines dry, or steel towns where there's no steel anymore. So it's a bad trip. But Baltimore, at least, that's still a lot of travel. Fortunately, WBC, which I guess I'm not clear on whether WBC is happening this year.
It's not. There's a lot of people talking online about getting together and just doing it.
Yeah.
Officially, it's my understanding it is not.
Yeah. But it's going to be at the Seven Springs Resort, which is about an hour from Pittsburgh or something like that. So that's like a 3-4 hour drive for me. I'll do that. So, theoretically anyway. Maybe I'll make it. I don't know. I'm not probably going to an unofficial one, but if there's an official one next year, I'll come.
So would you, now you've got me curious. If you went to WBC, would you compete or just hang out?
That's a great question. There are games there that are there where there are tournaments that I would play, but I'm generally speaking not a tournament player. I would, in all likelihood, go to hang out and or shop and or visit the auction more than to play. One of the only big tournaments that they run is the World of War tournament, which I have never played. I mean, I've played older versions of that system, but I mean, I've never played a World of War, so I'd have to practice for an entire year. 250-page rule book.
That would give me such a hard case of the nerves. Oh my god.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the other thing is you go into a game like that, it's supposed to take a week. If you shit the bed in the first day, how bad do you feel that right. You've just bombed out of the tournament in a record breaking time? So, and that's part of the reason why I don't like tournaments, because that's I don't do this to be under pressure, right? This is recreation for me. I do it because I want to do it. I'm much less interested in engaging in tournament play, but not everything that happens there is a tournament either. So,
no, that's my. I've never been. I looked at when I was a kid, and they would give the results from it in the general.
Mm-hmm.
I would
back when it was Avalon Con. Yeah.
Someday I will go there, and I too will compete with these luminaries. And I've never gone.
Yeah, I was. supposed to go in, what was it, 2019, and I had car problems that just prevented me. On the Saturday, it was like, well, this was my day to go. It's the Saturday of WBC, and I got a car with no air conditioning, and the windows just broke, so the windows don't roll down either, and it's in July. So I was not doing that, driving 4 hours to central Pennsylvania or western Pennsylvania in a car with no air conditioning and the windows don't roll down. I went and got the car fixed instead.
Yeah.
So that was my non-WBC experience. But it's another one of those events I've always liked to go to.
Well,
and
it seems like
proximity. I could day trip it.
And also, it really does strike me, at least what I've seen from people I know who have gone, that it's a really nice venue. It's kind of laid back. It's it's
except for all the pressure.
Well, that if you can avoid that,
you gotta
win. Well, okay. Look, if your thing is, and that now that obviously it's expanded into hobby board gaming, which why wouldn't it? It's like, what did I see? Was there a tournament for Lost Cities or something?
Oh, and for final was it called March Madness, the Old Avalon Hill March Madness game?
Oh, there you go.
There's a tournament of that runs. One of the local guys practiced, went every week, sat down and played March Madness to practice for WBC. And then he went to WBC and won the tournament. I was like, wow, that's dedication. I mean, if he had fun doing it, good for him, but that's not me.
And that's it. I forget how you phrased that, but that's just not how I'm put together. I just don't. I do not enjoy, which is part of the reason I've always had a beef with if you've got a point system in your game and that's how your game is built, especially if it's a miniatures game, I'm immediately going to look at you sideways because it's just not what now, if you want that for a pickup game, I get it. But if you're building it because you think you're going to be tournament-y, you can keep it. I'm of the generation DBA 1 where, I still remember we were playing. I remember reading it in one of the zines where somebody said that they had gone off to one of the DBA qualifiers and everybody was running this North African army that was crushing everything before it. And everybody was now suddenly hurriedly painting that army. I'm like, what are you doing? Not the way I choose to game. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Jeff, yes, that's exactly what happened. Although I moved in there too. So, I mean, it wasn't like I was going to Gen Con every year, right? I was not one of those folks. I mean, that'd be nice.
I'll defend this. Gen Con kicked us out.
Well,
I appreciate what Harold is doing. I really do, trying to bring wargaming back, and I've certainly supported
it. Oh, that's the insurgency thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that's fine. But I was here. When they, my first Gen Con was in 1982 when it was at UW Parkside.
Oh, God.
And I got to play, you talk about games that I would not play again. I love this game in concept. It's called The Complete Brigadier. Mm-hmm. I still have it. It is a game that requires a calculator for its diceless combat system.
Okay,
so I love it. I have it. It's there. No, never again.
I play Rollmaster, man. Calculator doesn't bother me. Diceless, on the other hand, no go.
Yeah. So 1982, I go there and I'm playing this game and I love it to bits. And I go through all these years, and then all of a sudden I go to Gen Con like I always had, and nobody could find the war games. They had moved us to the basement of the arena across from the Mecca.
I remember that. Yeah.
Which prompted the pin the very next year. I found the war games at Gen Con.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it was so big at one point, it had so outgrown its venue in Milwaukee, for those who didn't go, that it was in like every adjacent building that they could rent, borrow, or steal space from, including what was it, the college basketball arena?
Yep.
Or something like that. And they were literally, if you played it in like an RPGA D&D game, it was on the floor of the basketball arena, and it was all like cordoned off with these like hanging like tapestries or something like that to like cordon off individual like little blocks of 2 or 4 tables or something like that.
Which parenthetically is where they put the war gamers, except now it's the arena where the Colts play.
Okay. So wow. Okay.
At Gen Con, they're now there on the floor.
Really? Wow. Okay. So
look at Harold's pictures,
and that's the problem.
He said,
that's my problem is that they're in the same situation now in Indy that they were in Milwaukee 20 years ago, where they have outgrown the city. They don't have the space. Where do they get the space?
Well, hobby gaming. Nobody saw hobby gaming coming this way. You know, nobody saw this. And you know, if you say you did, you're telling lies, and it's sucking the air out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you know, I haven't gone in years. It used to be every single year, no matter where it was. It was a ritual. I loved it, and then just sooner or later, just stopped.
Yeah, my first one was Penzic 33. I think.
I've never gone.
So it's
never
something
gone.
else. I haven't been in about 7 years. So that Penzic 50 got canceled. So
I did Ren Fair for 14 years, so I think I did my time.
It is not the same experience. I will tell you, it is not the same experience. Is there a Venn diagram with an area in the middle where yes, there is, but it's not. I didn't find it all that similar to the Ren Fair experience. Let me put it that way. And if you're like a professional Rennie, that's a little bit different. But if as like an attendee at a Ren Fair, Penzic totally different experience.
Okay.
So at some point I'll do a show about it, but just
to your point about Venn diagrams, I just got tons of friends that have gone to war, and I've just never gone. It's very interesting.
Me too. I waited 20 years to go, and finally I went at like age 4, something like that, and I had a great time, and I was going back and went for 15 years, or the better part of 15 years. So
yeah, no, I'm going to be very curious to see how Gen Con particularly does, because there's a lot of back and forth with this. Oh God.
Yeah, this guy again. So
yeah,
but
no, wait a minute. I can't. I gotta excuse myself because I'm about to agree with him. I don't
think he's wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that is it. I mean, it's now so much part of the culture that. The cultural piece at Gen Con is massive. And why wouldn't they want to attract it as business? It's butts on seats. That's all that's going on.
Sure. Peter's delighted. So
yeah. But and to your earlier point, and this is exciting gaming conference. Well, I suppose it is. I mean, shoot, you know this. In the latter years
I don't care.
Up here in Milwaukee, we were sticking people out in Brookfield on a
regular
basis.
Yeah, just the hotel. And that's what kept me out of Gen Con, right? Unless I had somebody that I knew somebody who was going and I had a hotel space, I wasn't dealing with that Gen Con Housing Bureau bullshit. And they're back to that in Indianapolis now, where you have to put in for a random D20, roll on a random D20 table to determine what hotel you're going to be in. I'm not doing that. No.
Right. No.
I'll day trip it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just not doing it. It's so big that because it's a couple of years, the last couple of years that they've had it, it's sold out. It's like, well, okay, I guess I'm not going then.
The last year that I went, and we had been staying for years and years and years. We'd been staying at the Hyatt Place down by the airport.
Mm-hmm.
For those who know anything about Indy, that's literally that's the antipode of where Gen Con is. It's as you're almost not in Indianapolis at that point. But we liked it because it was easy to get to, access to the freeway, free breakfast or included breakfast, parking, and reasonable price, in and out, no problem. The last year we went, when we got back, I said, I really ought to check. And I waited like 2 weeks, and after that 2 weeks, I called and checked, and they were already sold out for the next year.
Not at all surprising. Our secret for Gen Con was the Hotel Wisconsin. I don't even know if it's still there, but it was in the list, so you could pick it, and you'd probably get your selection because it was like an ancient hotel, like 100-year-old hotel.
You're talking here in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
The Hotel Wisconsin is now apartments.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm totally not surprised. But it was like an ancient 100-year-old hotel or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was like a block from Mecca, or it wasn't even Mecca at the time. It was whatever Mecca turned into. Yeah. But that was our secret. The safe house is still there, though. Tell me the safe house is still there.
The safe house was purchased by the Marcus Corporation, the very same people that own the Hilton, and it has in some respects gotten cleaned up and is a little more franchisey. There is now a safe house in Chicago, I gather.
Oh, okay. Well, but I guess I'm not that surprised. Neat place, though.
Oh yeah, no, it's a very much part of who we are. That's right across from my office, City Hall. So.
Yeah, not me. Michicon or WinterCon. One of our local guys back in Cleveland went to Winter Fantasy regularly, which was, I think, exclusively an RPGA event, at least while he was going. And I was, of course, a snob about it at the time. The PGA get to play D&D with the peasantry, have fun. Yeah, not me. Let's see here. Unanticipated Speculative Origins 2002. I would have been at Origins 2002. I don't remember particular drama over the awards at the time. Well, not saying there wasn't, it's just that I don't remember it.
I'm amazed they remember to give Origins awards anymore.
Well, they don't have anything to do with wargaming anymore, I'll tell you that. So, which is why, the Charlies came back and were disappointing to many, which we have discussed already on the Armchair Dragoons podcast from like last year. It's like a 2-hour rant, but they're working on it. I know the Charlie people are working on that, and I know that other groups are working on their own awards too to make sure that we don't have an award system in wargaming that's dominated by clownish incompetence any further.
I'm gonna look right into the camera and I'm gonna say to everybody on the Charlies, pick 4 awards, just 4. Start there.
That would have helped. They could have vetted the nominees to make sure they all came out that year or were war games. I mean, that would have helped.
Yeah, just everybody wants to start huge, and I never understand that.
Well, they tried to pick up where in fairness, they tried to pick up where the Charlies left off.
That's right. That's right. This comment is absolutely correct. Because of the delay, they've moved it to November. They've popped it into the fall-in spot, and they're going back to that casino in Valley Forge where they were.
But they're calling it Historica.
Right. They were in that casino, which was a great year. I think I'm the only guy that really liked that year at Valley Forge. I had a blast. I got to play, and this is one of my absolute fondest memories. I got to play in a year where they gave a tribute to the late Duke Seafried, one of the great miniature gaming spectacle designers. And he brought, I think, 10 of his best games, and I got to play in 3 of them. Yeah, this is a guy who had storage lockers filled with his games, some of which sold for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. There were so many minis and so much awesome. His Islandwana went for a fortune. I played in his Sudan game and all this other stuff. So I have very fond memories of playing at Valley Forge. Plus, I got to go to Valley Forge, which was cool.
Well, that's cool, too. I mean, there's also stuff. We talked about stopping at Antietam Creek on the way home from Winter Offensive, actually, and because it was January, we didn't do that. So, I mean, the awards. I mean, I'll be less flippant about it and say that the results of the awards last year, the Charles S. Roberts Awards, did not speak to me as a wargamer, nor did I think they were reflective of the state of the wargaming hobby. In many cases, there was just a nearly unforgivable level of sloppiness in terms of games that came out years before, won awards for that year that made no sense because they never vetted anything. All the voting was done on Board Game Geek, where a wargaming audience didn't get the opportunity to vote on. Well, maybe they did, but they were drowned out by the vast number of people who played U-Boat, for example.
Which is not important.
Well, I don't think so either. And if you think it is, then you're wrong. But that's fine. You're not less of a human being because you're wrong about U-Boat being a war game. I still value you as a person if you are wrong about U-Boat. But again, I don't think it spoke to. And David Thompson had a really eloquent discussion of why this bothered wargamers that I can't repeat because I don't remember it verbatim. But essentially, it was that, you know, they were Wargaming's awards. They were the Wargaming Hobbies Awards, named after the founder of board wargaming, right? In some sense, a hobby that Charles S. Roberts was responsible for, and that we feel kind of got taken over and run by people who didn't. Again, they kind of took it over on a lark. It was a sudden thing. They didn't have a lot. They weren't prepared for a lot of the stuff that had to happen. I get that there's a learning curve, and I hope that they fix all the problems. But you know, it was screwed up fairly badly too. So I'm not trying to be hard on the people that ran the Charles S. Roberts Awards last year. I'm not trying to be any harder on it than I have already been. Let me put it that way. Their mistakes were made. I hope that they fix their systems so that they can improve in the future. And if not, again, our alternatives are coming.
Well, and you know, it's funny. We're officially magic reload. Thank you, magic reload. It's funny because we live in a world now where awards are, to me, somewhat marginalized in their value. Reason being, we've got the internet. We've got shows like yours.
True.
We've got shows like yours. I don't do game reviews, but we've got Armchair Dragoons where we do reviews.
Well, we can talk about games, though. I don't do reviews either, but I'm happy to talk about games. And if somebody finds something I said valuable, whether it's to say to you or to John or whoever is watching, I think I would like that game because he said this about it. Whether me, you know, there are reasons why I say there are negative things, right? And that's why I balked at saying I don't do reviews, because while I don't do reviews, I am still a critic in the sense that folks who are here regularly and know that where I'm coming from and can say, well, he didn't like this thing, but from his discussion of it, I would probably like it. So,
yeah, no,
and that's valuable.
And that's it. It can be as simple as a friend, you're kind of leaning over to a virtual friend and going, hey, do you think I'll like this game or not? Because depending where you are in life, a board game these days can be a pretty substantial investment.
That's true, especially if it's ASL. But yeah, so Jim, I think you hit the button on this on, I think, Twitter not too long ago, where by all accounts, YouTube is fun. YouTube. Two scotches. U-Boat is a fun game to play, but I strongly suspect, having seen it played, that Captain Sonar is substantially more fun.
I have both. I can show you my U-Boat. It's built back here. I've never taken it down because I don't want to try to take it apart.
You keep your U-Boat to yourself, sir.
Hey, I'm going to show you my U-Boat. Now I'm suddenly sounding like No Enemies Here. That's right, I said it. But no, love that guy. Love that guy.
Oh, Dan, we love Dan.
Dan, we love
Dan
you
very much.
Love you, Dan. But no, it's you talk about if I got 8 dudes, 4 dudes because there's a smaller version. If I got 4 dudes and we want to have sub fun, and especially if I want to have a command exercise. Speaking of the topic of Kriegspiel, and I want to sort of go through what it is to face some of this friction. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna play Captain Sonar. It's more fun, and it gets at the exact same stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a great point. Captain Sonar, and I mean, you can go watch. For those who don't know what Captain Sonar is, it's basically a submarine LARP, an opposed submarine LARP. Watch videos of it on YouTube. It absolutely is closer to what we've been talking about in terms of Kriegspiels than U-Boat is.
Which is an elaborated worker placement game.
Yeah.
Not a bad one.
I mean, it's got a very fancy thing and an app and all that, but, you know, but I mean, in terms of, you know, is if we're going to argue about U-Boat, I'm going to say Captain Sonar is more of a war game than U-Boat is, because it gets at the heart of the decision space. Where U-Boat doesn't.
Dr. James Starrett and I get into this. Captain Sonar is a bigger war game than a lot of things that he thinks are war games. But allow me to share my principle very briefly on that. I think a lot of things are war games. I think a lot of things aren't. I think that, and it doesn't matter. I don't worry
That's
about the
absolutely right.
I don't worry about the definition. I don't fight about it because I don't think it matters. Do I think this is a war game? No. So, do you like it? Then you should play it, and we should be done with that conversation.
I mean, people want to, and I think there are reasons, because I think a lot of times when people say that kind of thing, well, that's not a war game, it either comes off as super snobby, and sometimes is intended that way. And I when I say it, I fully intend it to be super snobby. But
Me too.
But I also don't necessarily mean that therefore it is bad. And I get into this with the Combat Commander folks who adore Combat Commander for what it does. I despise Combat Commander. I think it is a terribly, for me, it's a completely unfun experience. But I say with complete sincerity, if you enjoy Combat Commander, play Combat Commander, have fun. I am literally happy for you that you enjoy that game that I don't like. There's room for my preferences and your preferences and everybody else's preferences.
Yeah.
Now, see, if we put a T-Rex in it, then it would be a war game, right? I mean, we have dinosaur table battles. So why can't we have a T-Rex in U-boat, or like Godzilla or Cthulhu or something like that? U-boat versus Cthulhu. Give me that. That would be fun.
Well, I have not once but twice on my channel played live games of the creature that ate Sheboygan.
Yeah, I watched one of those.
And it's a war game. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sure.
They just changed. They slapped a different theme on it. But let's face it. Go back to those early SPI games. There's a lot of theme slapping going on.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Well,
plus, especially late. I mean, say late in the period. So say 77, 78. But some of the examples of this predate that period. A few do, where it was obvious to SPI that science fiction and fantasy stuff was really popular.
Yes.
And they tried to move into that space. Now, a lot of the science fiction and fantasy stuff that they were thinking of was RPGs, which had taken some of the market wind out of wargaming's sales at that. I mean, sales in terms of the boat's sales, not sales in terms of money, because I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think Jim Dunnigan's actual sales figures, as he presented them in the second edition of the Complete Wargamers Handbook, actually bear me out. The number one SPI year for sales was 1981, the last full year of their operation. They had serious cash flow problems and profitability problems, but lack of sales wasn't the issue. But they saw, hey, science fiction and fantasy is popular, so you started to see a lot more of those kinds of games pop up, starting in about 77, 78, last 2, 3, 4 maybe years of SPI's existence, including things like the creature that ate Sheboygan and a whole little line of mini games with demons and
World Killer.
World Killer was another one. They did Aries Magazine, which has some games that I think some people, I've never played any of them, but some people really like some of those Aries Magazine games, for example. And that was like an S&T type of thing, where there's a game that they did, I think SPI did about 15 issues of it, something like that. And there's a game in every issue, right? And even after TSR took it over, TSR put about 3 issues out. There was still a game in every issue. And then they folded it into Dragon, and that went away.
I've got a bunch of those, and let's face it, the greatest of them all, the one RPG to rule them all, Universe.
I recently reacquired a copy of Universe from our mutual friends at Enterprise Games for a quite reasonable price for a boxed copy, which included Delta V and all the other stuff. So
very nice.
Yeah, there was 2 editions. They're functionally identical, but one of them's a boxed game and includes Delta V, the Starship Combat wargaming type thing, and then the other one was just a book. They did the same thing with Dragon Quest, their science fiction RPG. Universe was a John Butterfield design, as I recall.
It is.
Boy, that's interesting. And actually, Butterfield did Freedom in the Galaxy from them, too, which is yep, I still have it right here.
Dun, dun, dun.
Later picked up by Avalon Hill. And I actually traded my Avalon Hill edition and a couple extra goodies, I think, for an SPI edition, because I like the counters better. But some of these, not all of them hold up really that well, but some of them do. I think there's probably a higher percentage of sci-fi and fantasy things from SPI that hold up today than their historical games. I think the percentage of keepers among their sci-fi range is higher than in their historical range.
Ooh, yeah. And they innovated. I mean, the movement system in World Killer and in Delta V.
And Star Force.
Yeah.
Yeah. Star Force is a fascinating, not super fun to play, I have to admit, but it's a fascinating extrapolation of, hey, here's some sci-fi ideas that we've developed into this sort of cohesive universe. Here's what that would look like as a war game, right? They did some really interesting things. And this thing is, I think, a winner too. And this came out in 1979, so a couple years after Star Wars, and it's totally Star Wars with the serial numbers filed off. But before Empire, right? So it's like all they had to go on was Star Wars, and they did this thing, and it was popular enough that Avalon Hill wanted it, so they bought it along with a bunch of other stuff. So this is totally true. But no true Scotsman.
Yeah.
No, that's not wrong. I will, but here's the thing. People get super bound up in this discussion, and I don't care. And there's no reason you should care what my opinion is, right?
And that's the root of my views. And I've tried, and Brandt has made this point, and he's right. Unless you are in a award ceremony giving out an award for something,
yeah,
or unless you're an historian trying to make a taxonomy for whatever research purpose you're doing. If you're just a consumer or a player, there is no universe in which it matters. It just doesn't.
That's absolutely right.
You know, and
absolutely right.
And I just, yes, and people want to engage me on this when I talk about it from time to time, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. It's like, because I can't. I will tell you if I feel something is a war game and if it isn't, and then we can play it. If I think it's not a war game and I like it, we're going to play it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm pretty focused on war games, to be honest about it, but there's non-war games that I like, and there's even Euros that I like, believe it or not. I mean, I've played and had a reasonable amount of fun with Terraforming Mars, which was a Euro that somebody mentioned up thread a little bit. That's a reasonably fun game. Another Euro that I like is Lords of Waterdeep, which is one of the D&D board games, the current line of D&D board games, and it's, of the three that I've played, it's handily the best one.
Well,
but it's a worker placement game.
Yeah, Lords of Waterdeep is consequential because it's probably the game that's responsible for suggesting the most to RPG gamers, hey, this hobby board gaming is okay. Because it had a theme.
That's probably true, yeah. And honestly, that's why I was interested in it in the first place. And then I've played it several times and had a lot of fun with it. And frankly, it goes on ridiculous sale on Amazon every couple of months. So I've got in the expansion for a total of like less than $50.
Yeah, my biggest problem is because I play so much on Tabletop Simulator and because I build so much on Tabletop Simulator, that I've got my gaming time is booked up. But if I do reach out and play something else, it's going to be a pretty traditional thing, like a Twilight 2000, Savage World, Space 1899, something like that.
Well, frankly, the original Space 1889 system probably doesn't hold up all that well nowadays.
No, I was stunned. They had a deal on I love Frank Chadwick. Okay, whoa, just steady on. I love Frank Chadwick. Sure. I love Twilight 2000. I love Valiant Bayonet. I love so much of what he does. Valiant Bayonet changed Napoleonic wargaming forever. Changed it forever. Pitched over the side a lot of classic Napoleonic tropes. Love Frank Chadwick. Went back to Space 1889 because RPG Vault had an all-in-one compendium deal for like $20.
Yeah, and setting-wise, that setting was about a decade ahead of its time.
It's
maybe 2 decades.
So great you say this. I have seriously challenged my friends who are steampunk to say, where did this come from? And they source it, and most everybody, and I'm no expert. I am no expert. But I am very curious to hear somebody tell me that something is older in steampunk than Frank Chadwick. I mean, other than Jules Verne. Who's...
And if I think that's a bit of a reach to say that's steampunk. I mean, I get why people say that, but Space 1889 predate the Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling, does it?
It does.
Because that's the book that a lot of people point to for steampunk.
I think it does. And so, I was getting it because I wanted his colonial miniatures rules that's in that set. But I went back and I looked at the role-playing rules and I went, I'm not doing this. I am not. It's got a lot of the same problems, quite frankly, that Twilight 2000 had.
So there's a new one. For those who don't know, there is a new Twilight 2000 game coming from Free League. There was a Kickstarter for it, I think, last year. I don't think it's out yet, but I think it's close. And it's going to not have the old system.
Well, I'm a little bit curious about, and now we have the Twilight 2000 conversation, and I think I had this with Brandt on the show. My question about it was, so much of Twilight 2000 was of its time. You know, I am that kid that grew up in the shadow of the nuclear threat. You know, Day After Tomorrow, all that other stuff. You know, we are going to be incinerated in a nuclear attack. Oh my God, mutually assured destruction, all this other stuff. This was not speculative. This was stuff that could happen. I'm very curious to see how they hang this in a world where that seems far less likely. Although, in some ways, I wonder if it isn't more likely.
Well, that's a bit meta. That's a bit too heavy for this show. Let me
dig it. Yeah. But I also have, I'll confess my sins. I have my Siege of the Citadel fix.
Somebody, I think we pointed this out to you at the time. Sometime either at the last Origins or the Origins before, there was a huge Space 1889 miniatures game happening.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people that love that set of minis rules. It's steampunky. It's fighting on Mars. It's a blast. It's a blast. And that piece of it, the concept, the world, that endures. That endures. The rules, not so much.
Yeah. Well, that's not really that surprising. I agree with Doug here. I'll extend. So I'm actually not a fan of Savage Worlds. I don't think it's that good. Nevertheless, I would handily, if I were going to run a Space 1889 game or a Rifts game, I would handily choose Savage Worlds over the organic rules from the original games. In either case, the Space 1889 rules I don't think have aged well and are clumsy. The Rifts rules are just trash, and not worth any. I mean, as a rules system, a lot of cool ideas in the game, but the game system is garbage. And Savage Worlds, in comparison, is going to be orders of magnitude easier to deal with. So
yeah, I was going to say at least Savage Worlds has the courtesy to get out of your way.
More or less, yeah. See, I don't think it's quite as clean as the people that write the Savage Worlds material seem to feel it is. That's my thing. But nevertheless, it's a lot easier to deal with than Rifts, that's for sure.
I have no experience, but it sounds like a low bar.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah, it's post-apocalyptic, and there was this when the nuclear war went off, it set off this dimensional fracas where all these alien dimensions kind of overlapped into Earth too. So there's cyborgs and superheroes and aliens and evil empires and vampires and all this. It's the kitchen sink of kitchen sinks. And the system is the old Palladian fantasy role-playing system with a couple of extra really badly handled mechanics added onto it. It doesn't work. But nevertheless, it's kind of a cool setting if you want a completely gonzo kitchen sink type of thing. So this is an interesting selection, I gotta say. I mean, could you make that work? Yeah, you could make that work. I think you'd have an easier time with something like GURPS if you're gonna go that route, though. But Savage Worlds is pretty easy. It's pretty hackable. There's a ton of material for it, so you can.
There's actually an 1889 book.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, so you don't need to do the work. You just buy the Savage Worlds 1889 stuff, and you're good to go.
Yep. As
opposed to having to port something over to whatever other generic system.
No, I have vast. I have a lot of experience with GURPS. And I guess that point all comes down to what your group is willing to put up with. How much time they're willing to commit, how many times they expect to have a a significant encounter, and how many times they're willing to just, have a, how many times they want to fight a big bad.
I never successfully got GURPS off the ground for anything that ran more than a couple of sessions. There was just no audience for it here. There are people who would buy the books as references because they were really good for that. But nobody was particularly interested in playing it in the Cleveland area.
When I was in grad school, I had a fantasy game that ran for 3.5 years. Good time.
Perfectly serviceable fantasy system. And if you look at the early editions of GURPS, you could see how it's built to accommodate that very cleanly.
Well, it's the same thing Steve Jackson has with just about every rule set he's ever written. It's like, dude, you wrote this system like this. There is no logic that says, oh, because 100 points is good, 300 points is better. Or 500 points. He started having 300, 400, 500 point supers, and the thing just completely fell apart.
Supers is one of the areas in which I think GURPS does not work especially well. Let me put it that way.
It didn't work for anything 4-color.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. Yeah, you could do like gritty type of superheroes with GURPS, and I think it would work okay.
Yep.
But the way the points balancing, you can even see it in stuff like Lensman, where you have 15.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Characters.
Oh
where
wow.
Kim Kinnison is like a 1,500 point character or something stupid like that. And it's at that point that, well, it's well before that point that the system begins to break down.
No, I remember buying Lensman and thinking, are you kidding me? Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderfully written source book on the material.
Was the thing. And to your exact point, I mean, the people he had writing these books were passionate for their topics, which is nice.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite GURPS books, actually. It's just really neat. But it's, I'm actually kind of a fan, dated as they are, of the Lensman, the original books. But Hot Lead, oh my God. Yeah, so that's exactly right. In the miniatures game, they couldn't, in a role-playing game, maybe you could just hand wave it and the game master can kind of manually make it work at the table. That can work in an RPG. In a miniatures game where it's a competitive game, nope, sorry. And
I still have my beta sheets.
Years in the making.
Well, he had to.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Well, it was literally supposed to be like the GURPS of miniatures games, where you were supposed to be able to play like cavemen versus space marines. Okay, but how do you make that fun, right? That is a question that wargaming asks a lot. How do you make this lopsided engagement fun, right?
Not fun.
Yeah, well, that's true too. I mean, it can be one or the other or both. And a lot of like Great Battles of History scenarios will say that this scenario was wildly unbalanced, right in the scenario description. And it is mainly interesting as an academic exercise as to figure out, kind of get a sense of the battle and what happened and why and all that. But it's not going to be fun for one of the players. A lot of people don't like to play the Germans in like a D-Day game. This, for some reason, it's come up a lot in my feed lately. People playing D-Day games, and it's much less fun to play the Germans in a D-Day game, generally speaking.
It's the greatest example of all time, in my judgment. France, 1940, the Liners Notes, where they tell you want the historical setup. It's right here.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say we didn't warn you.
Yeah, and there's been many attempts to make that into a fun and interesting game. Let me put it that way. I think the one that I've played that actually works the best in that sense is the OCS one, actually, because it's very challenging for the Germans. The Germans have to do everything right to get a historical result, which is frustrating as the German player. Let me tell you, because I did not do everything right. So, but. It depends on your Carl's comment here. It depends on your personality. Some people will have more fun playing on the defensive side that's getting kicked around all the time than others. A lot of people don't like to play the Soviets in a lot of East Front games because they spend, even if it covers the whole war, they're going to spend the first year and a half getting kicked around, or at least the first 6 months or so getting kicked around before they can really meaningfully strike back.
I think it ultimately also goes into the time investment you're expecting. I've played a ton of decisive campaigns, which I still think is the normative treatment of those campaigns on the computer.
I bet keep looking at those. They're on my want list.
Yeah, I would definitely. Well, you can start from the end. Do Case Blue. The Case Blue game. I've played the Russians on a number of occasions in a PBEM game, and yeah, you're going to get the stuffing kicked out of you. But trying to come up with credible counterattacks, trying to keep block Rostov, all those other things. Those are fun. I enjoyed them. I really did. I don't mind. I never mind losing because I do it so bloody much. But you
I have to be okay with it too.
You really better be okay with it. But also, I think it depends on the time investment you're making. You're asking me to make.
That's absolutely true.
You want to kick the snot out of me for 2 hours or 3 hours? Sure. You want to kick the snot out of me for 7 weeks? I'm not sure I'm so in.
Yeah, understandable. So Jeff, leave it to my awesome chat to mention.
There it is.
Scene Point was coined by SF author K.W. Jeter for works by Tim Powers, James Blaylock, and himself. Well, I can tell you that Anubis Gates well predates Space 1889. James Homunculus might not, but Anubis Gates definitely does. I forget when Space 1899 came out, but it was late 80s, second half of the 80s, to the best of my recollection. So hilariously, you can get all this stuff again as well. Melee and Wizard and the Family
1989.
Well, that makes sense. Space 1889, after all.
There it is.
So, yeah. All right. So, I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. We've had a bit of a different show tonight. I'd especially like to thank Jim for agreeing to be on at not exactly the last minute, but I didn't give him too much warning either. We will be back next week to do our standard counter clipping stuff. I have no idea what I'll be clipping. Hopefully I'll get something new by then. That would be cool. But we'll be back next week, and there's other videos coming out this week that I won't bore you with. So I'd like to thank everybody once again, and everybody have a great night.